Well, hello to everyone. Joanne Freeman here with History Matters, and so does coffee in the mug that I put too far away for me to pick up. You're just going to have to trust me on this one. It's there. I'll admit it's from Starbucks, but it is over there. At any rate, an explanation as to why this is happening without warning. So there's a meeting tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock that was scheduled without really my tuning in on the timing of it. And I have to go. It's one of those meetings you can't miss. So I can't be here at 10 a.m. And so for that reason, I'm here instead. Because as ever, I will not miss one of our conversations. I will not miss it today. So first of all, apologies. I need more of that coffee. Apologies for springing this on you. Normally, I'm able to give you advance warning, but I didn't really have advance warning, and I've been out of town. Second, what I'm going to do today is something a little bit different from what we've done before, because it's a big topic, and I think it'll be a good topic to try this out on. And I don't know if you can hear. There you go. Peeping newbies is very happy there beside me. It's a big topic. I think it's one that we'll have a lot more to say about. So I'm going to introduce it today, make a few points about it today, and then we can continue it next week. And you will have time to think about it, come up with questions. A little daunting for me, for you to have all that advanced time to think about it. But as you'll see, I think this topic merits it. And basically, the general topic that I want to discuss is, are the founders relevant today? Big topic, one that obviously we will be able to continue next week. I will talk about it briefly this morning to open up our conversation. And obviously, and we've talked about this before in a lot of different ways, in one way or another, the founders have been coming in and out of our conversations for 2 years. It will not be surprising at all for me to say that people tend to do one of two things about the founders these days. They either want to glorify them as being demigods of a sort, or they want to denounce them as being meritless in a way. And there's a big middle ground there, which is part of what I want to talk about here, because glorifying them as demigods gets us nowhere. And I'm going to circle back around to that at the end of my comments this morning. And some denouncing is needed and has long been denied. But there's some recognition of some things of value in the mix. And that's the sort of thing that I want to talk about today, and then again next week. I want to look at some of the ideas that they put in motion, because in some ways they matter profoundly. They continue to matter profoundly, even ideas that they themselves did not necessarily live up to. Now, at the outset, I will say something which, if you were to have bingo cards, would be on the card. I just know. At the outset, I want to repeat something I've said many a time before, and that is, there is no founder blob. And I could, if there were chat here, I know that that would be happening right now as soon as I said founders, but there's no founder blob. There is no founder blob. And what I've always meant by that is, people are prone to say the founders thought, and in fact, there is no the founders. There was no great uniform consensus on the sorts of things that people are prone to look back to the founders for. There's no single point of view. And that's part of what I want to talk about here today. People tend to cherry pick their words and ideas to support something contemporary in our time. But I'd rather look at some of what they did and thought, actually did and thought, and think about its relevance today. And by what have they done or thought that matters profoundly, I don't mean something as specific as, well, they created a constitution, which many would still argue about, is that good or bad? We're not going to be talking on that level. We're going to, in a sense, be talking more broadly than that. So, for example, one thing that they did that has value, and I've written down here in my notes, it says non-blobness. And by that, I mean just what I just said. The simple fact that there was not an absolute consensus on what they were doing, the fact that there were varied views, the fact that there was argument and debate, and sometimes very fierce argument and disagreement and conflict, all of these things which one might be prone to label as bad, the fact that they were happening at this time, that's good, because that's part of a democratic system. Conflict and ideas banging up against each other and disagreement, and when you can manage it, compromise and debate, all of this conflict. Democracy is about conflicting interests and conflicting ideas. And so that, in a sense, the fact that the founders themselves were part of that dynamic, that matters. That's how our system is supposed to work. It's an important point to bear in mind, generally speaking, right? It's built into our system. It's a particularly important point to bear in mind nowadays, when there are some people who appear to be less interested in actual conflicting ideas and free and fair contests that determine victors. So clashing ideas, clashing interests, the fact that they have to exist within our system. That's how a democracy works. And the founders themselves showed that in a variety of different ways, which it's tempting to say, well, it was conflict, it's bad. It was actually a very good model of what a democratic politics, as messy and conflict-ridden as it can be, can look like when it's functional. Okay, now that said, another thing that we can certainly point to them and say ideas or actions that they did that are relevant today, and this was not going to be a surprise to anyone, but obviously the exclusive nature of who they considered to be part of the systems, constitutional and otherwise, that the founders put into place, obviously that matters profoundly as well. The thoughts and ideas of the founders that they accomplished that are worth something matter, even if they themselves did not live up to those ideas and thoughts. But the sins of the founders, if you want to call it that, the crimes of the founders, the ways in which they did not do what we would want them to do, the ways in which they in some ways committed crimes against humanity, obviously that matters too. And in essence, just as we can say that their disagreement helped to bake the conflict of democracy into our system, the entrenchment of slavery, the unwillingness to deal with it, and thus the many ways in which it was entrenched within our nation and within our constitutional process of governance, and the many ways in which the founders, key founders, remained part of that system, although in different ways, that matters profoundly too. You can't point to that and say that everything we're experiencing today is based on that, because that lets a lot of people off the hook between the founding and the present, whose influence in the question of racism, inequity, and the lingering impact of slavery, there's a long trail of people who have been part of this process and who have helped lead to some of the problems that we face today in the realm of racism. But the fact that the people who we look to for certain ideals are also the people who in some ways dramatically violated those ideals in ways that we are grappling with rather fiercely today, or at least should be, that matters profoundly as well. You can't understand who we are as a nation without acknowledging and threading through the founding and thereafter the simple fact of that crime against humanity existing in American history in different ways, with different kinds of protests taking place during our history. Slavery is the original crime against humanity, a belief in inequity and in allowing some races to be treated better than other races. Again, I can't say the founders are entirely responsible for that, because many people between them and us contributed to that. But you can understand how there's absolutely no way we can understand where we are, and in some ways the mess we're in, unless we can see the long trail of moments and ideas and people that led to this point. And as part of that, we can acknowledge that our founding wasn't a golden, glorious, ideal moment apart from everything else, because it wasn't. It was part of a process. And interestingly, and I think I've said this before and I didn't look up to see, but if so, I'm going to repeat it again, and I'll probably say it again next week. The founders themselves didn't believe that they were demigods. They didn't believe that they were doing something above and beyond everything that should come after. They were pragmatic in what they were doing. They wanted to create a government that would continue on, that future generations, ideally, of Americans would be able to continue in. It wasn't intended to be some thing beamed down from heaven, which golden founders sort of put into place. That's an image and perhaps a need that posterity has imposed on the founding. It's not what they thought at all. And I believe I've quoted John Adams, who said again and again and again in his old age, he was asked, as the surviving founders were, those who lasted a while, like Jefferson and Adams and James Madison, were asked, tell us about the founding by reverent people who wanted to write to the people who wrote the Declaration, helped to write the Constitution. What happened? What was it like? And many of them engaged in this, but John Adams was particularly skilled at puncturing any attempt at pomposity or demigod status because it was important. So again and again, he would say things like, we blundered our whole way through the revolution. It wasn't so great. I don't have his quote in front of me, but it's something like, we blundered everywhere but Saratoga and Yorktown. Where did we not blunder? We blundered in 1776, 77, 78, 79. And he continues on, really making his point. We blundered. It wasn't perfect. He talks about watching people sign the Declaration of Independence. And he's to someone who says, tell us about the Declaration. He says, yeah, I'll tell you. I sat there and I watched some of the people sign it, and some of them didn't want to sign it. Some of them looked uncomfortable. Some of them looked really displeased. This was not a glorious upswell of emotion in which everyone said, yes, independence. That never happened. There was conflict. There were people who were not happy about that moment. And finally, he says at a later point to someone, again, I didn't have time to pull the quote, but he says something along the lines of, to tell you the truth, to the person who wrote to him, I have no reason to believe we were any better than you are. Now, why does he keep saying that again and again and again and again? Because it matters, because our founding wasn't this sort of immaculate conception, right? Our founding was very much born of flawed people. What happened was filled with mistakes. It was assumed to be flawed, and it was assumed to be something that would have to be worked at to continue for it to survive. It relied on an engaged populace. All of these things were part of the foundation of whatever we want to brand the founding. Now, the populace and who we define that as, like who is included in the we we're talking about during the founding, that's a big question. And there are many people that were not included in that we, which is part of what we need to talk about more broadly. But the imperfections, the flaws, the sins, and the ideals and ambitions all matter and are all in their way relevant to the ways in which we understand how we got to where we are and how we can best grapple with where we are. Golden ideal founders do us no good. Grounded, flawed founders who were reprehensible in some ways and had other worthy ideas that they didn't live up to, that matters. That matters much more. And when I say that they're pragmatic, I actually did have time to look up this quote. Why? Because it's Alexander Hamilton, and I knew it existed, and I just had to find the exact wording. I sat here when I was preparing this morning for this, saying it's the Coate quote. Who said the Coate quote? And I finally found it. They were pragmatic, the founders, in the sense that they really did want a functioning government grounded on people who would be able to keep it going. They weren't trying to create something above and beyond what people could do or above and beyond what they saw in front of them as what Americans were like, flaws included. So in a sense, they very much wanted to fit governments, the American government, and actually they talked about this in relation to France as well. They wanted to fit governments to their people. If you were trying to design constitutions and governments for nations, the idea was, again, in the most pragmatic sense, think about who those people are. Think about what they've had in the past, what experience they've had in the past, what their government has been in the past, socially, politically, economically, how they survive, what they seem capable of doing, and then fit the government to who they are. They were doing that in the United States. And again, we can think of that in ways both good and bad, but that was a fact. They were being pragmatic in that way. And Hamilton is the person who in 1799 actually put this into words. He made the code quote. So the only thing I blamed myself for this morning was I forgot that it was Hamilton who made the code quote. I was going to I was going to give credit to Gouverneur Morris, but no. So in 1799, Hamilton wrote actually to the Marquis de Lafayette. So things are going on in France, and he's very much talking about France and the United States. Hamilton says, a government must be fitted to a nation as much as a coat to the individual. And consequently, that what may be good at Philadelphia may be bad at Paris and ridiculous at Petersburg. I kind of love that quote. But the overall point that he's making is an important one, and is what the founders, the non-blob founders, were trying to do generally, was create something that they saw as practical and suited to the American people. Elitism and racism right in the mix with something that seemed more democratic than what came before. All of that was bound up in what we now call the founding. Okay, so here's what I want to do next week. And so this is, how shocking is this, that you're going to hear about this on a Friday, and I already know what I want to do the following Friday. I want to talk about this in person with you there and with you able to ask questions, because we're always grappling with the founders. And I think in some ways, the conflict that I see when I'm sort of out talking about our government and democracy, and the responses I get, which sometimes are democracy doesn't work, and sometimes are, we've never had it, why does it matter? You know, on the first hand, it doesn't work, we need something better. On the right, we've never had it, so why does it matter? On the left, in some ways, the way we think about the founding and acknowledging the flaws and the ideals might get us away from that extreme way of looking at things and get us into a far more complicated and I think useful way of understanding what the heck happened during the founding period and how it might be useful for us to think about it, both to be accurate in our understanding and to be able to use that understanding to better understand what's going on today, particularly in the realm of democracy. Because obviously, in one way or another, over and over and over again on History Matters, and so does coffee, that's what we come back to, which is how does better understanding our history, how does better understanding the past of American history, what's happened, how it worked, the mechanics of it, the dynamics of it, the people engaged in it, the documents left behind from it, how does our understanding of those things equip us with knowledge or methods or tools to better deal with the complexity and the conflict and the uncertainties and the contingency of the present, because it can and it does. And that's part of what I, as a historian, am always striving to do on History Matters, and indeed also on my podcast. And it's part of what I enjoy having us do as a group, as a community, every Friday morning, because it's important. In a sense, I always say, thank you for engaging in democracy. We're engaging in democracy to better understand democracy and ideally to protect it. So I believe I'm just about a little short of what I normally might say, but I'm going to stop here because I want to save things for next week. And so you will have, I believe this will be posted at least a few days before next Friday. So give it a look. Of course, if I'm saying this, you already have given it a look, so that makes no sense. But at any rate, Numi and I are telling you to view this, think about it, think about your views of the founders, think about how you teach or don't teach about the founders, and we can have a real conversation about this, because in a way, there are infinite ways to approach this topic, and all of them are bound up with how we understand the United States. Okay, I'm going to stop there. I am going to thank you for engaging in democracy, even though I am going to be engaging in a meeting on Zoom rather than engaging in democracy with you on Friday morning. Be well, be safe during the week, folks, and I will see you in person the following Friday, where we will kind of continue to get down and dirty with what the founders, who they were, and what they can and should and shouldn't mean to us. Okay, folks, have a good week. Bye.